Richard Skipper celebrates. Every show is a celebration. Richard Skipper celebrates the best in entertainment. Each show, Richard delivers the artists you love, showcasing what makes them unique. Never gossipy. The antidote to a sometimes hectic world. Now, here's your host, Richard Skipper.
Happy Tuesday, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Richard Skipper Celebrates. What are you celebrating tonight? For those of you who are joining us for the first time, my show is all about celebrating. It's about celebrating life, celebrating art, celebrating artists, because I do believe that there's a lot to celebrate if we only take the time to do so. Last night, I had the great opportunity to celebrate a live performance. I hosted the 13th Annual Legacy Awards for dancers over 40. And yes, all the dancers were over 40. I also hosted the very first annual Legacy Awards 13 years ago when they honored my dear friend Marge Champion and Nicole Barth. May they both rest in peace. I miss them both tremendously daily. Speaking of dancers over 40, last month they honored the incredible Tommy Tune. And on that panel that evening was the incredible Jeff Calhoun. Now, I can't think of Tommy Tune without thinking of Jeff and vice versa. And we're going to talk about how their lives are so intertwined, but we're going to celebrate the incredible career of Jeff. He is a director. He is a choreographer. He is a dancer. He is an actor. He is an all-around great guy. And we were backstage schmoozing, and he said, "I'd love to do your show." And my heart jumped out of my chest, because this is something that I've been wanting to happen for a long, long time. And before we jump into the celebration of Jeff, I want to ask you, in addition to being here tonight, what are you celebrating right now?
Wow, you're so positive and up, Richard. It's really so refreshing giving these times. I think Right now, to be honest, I celebrate every day my parents.
That's great.
My dad is 93 and my mom is 90. And they're still with us, and I try to celebrate that every day. That, along with the fact that I am married to the most wonderful guy in the world, Michael. I'm celebrating family.
I love the fact that you started with that. Now, are your parents still in Pennsylvania?
No, when I went off to college, when I went to Northwestern, they moved to New Jersey. And then in the last few years, we moved them right up the river to Yonkers. So after New Jersey, they moved to Connecticut, and the house was just getting too big, and we wanted to be closer to them and to see them more often. And so we moved them to a beautiful place just right off Metro North at the Greystone stop, and it's been a real blessing. So it's really something to celebrate.
Have you had the opportunity to see them a lot during the last year and a half, especially during COVID?
Especially, I had COVID.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was hard. I was in the hospital for a week, and it was frightening. But as soon as I recovered, I see them. I try to see them 3 times a week. Sometimes it's only once a week, but I try to see them as often as possible, because when I was young, this business is hard enough, even when you have the most supportive parents, and that's what I did. I had parents that, my mom spent her life driving me from dance recital to play practice to football practice. I always called it football rehearsal just to mess with the guys. And my dad would come see everything I was in, no matter where he was and working. So I had the most supportive parents that you could ask for. And I'm so grateful for that I just want to celebrate them in this chapter of their life.
Well, I think that's wonderful. I want to ask you, you grew up in a town just north of Pittsburgh, if I'm not mistaken. Um, and brothers and sisters, or tell us a little bit about your life. I asked for a photograph of you as a 5-year-old. There was a reason that I asked for that, because to me, the 5-year-old self, I think, is the purest self. That's just before school starts,
Right.
before peer pressure gets added on,
Mm.
and before teachers start to tell you who you should or should not be. And I want to know a little bit about the 5-year-old Jeff. You couldn't find a 5-year-old self, but we do have a photograph here, and I love this compilation. This is the young Jeff, and I love this, and I just literally grabbed these photographs just before showtime. So I'm really looking at this for the first time, and there you are, so early on, having a sense of knowing who you are, and I love this.
Yeah, but Richard, I can tell you, my line didn't get any better as I got older. It's a little embarrassing to see these. And I know what you mean about, well, first of all, to answer your question, I have an older brother who's 3 years older than me, who's just retired. He was an endodontist. So he spent his life doing root canals.
Wow, good for him.
And we couldn't be more opposite. But when you talk about that 5-year-old, I'm sorry I didn't read your email more closely. I actually went back and I didn't see where that was, but had I could have found that picture, because my parents have an album of us, the kids growing up. And you want to know something? I don't know, maybe it's sad, but I know exactly what you mean about looking at yourself at 5. I don't remember that person. You know, I hear people talk about they have instant recall or recollection when they were that age, and I wish I did, but I really don't. I look at him and I just think, wow. I look into his eyes and I wish I could relate more to that person, because I know that's when you're the most pure. And you know, as an artist, as you grow older, I think the biggest challenge is trying to maintain that playful, innocent young person, you know, that's not intimidated by rules and society and pressure, because I think you're the most creative when you're young and you don't know what you can't do. So I wish I looked into that 5-year-old and could relate to him, but I can relate in theory to the importance of maintaining that childlike quality.
Now, going back once again to that 5-year-old time frame in your life, you and I are pretty much from the same age range. I think I'm older than you are. But when I grew up in the 60s, in an era of, I grew up in a television household. I don't know if you did or did not. I grew up at a time where there were 3 networks, and those 3 networks vied for the largest demographic. So I grew up watching variety shows. I grew up wanting to be a part of that world. And that was the show business that I wanted to be a part of. When did you first become aware of a world of show business?
Oh, it's the same thing. No, Richard, you hit the nail on the head. It's the same thing. You know, I would watch the Carol Burnett show and the Ernie Flatt dancers would come on. And I would say to my parents, I want to do that. And my dad was like, no, you don't. And I'm like, oh, yes, I do. I want to do that. Even if
it goes back to the line from Tommy Tune, where he says that his father said, you know, every Texan wants his son to grow up to be in the chorus of a Broadway show. So.
Well, that's funnier, and he's smarter than I'll ever be, but I wish I was smart enough to create that line. No, I wanted to be either Terry Bradshaw, because I was a diehard Pittsburgh Steeler fan, or Gene Kelly, who was also from Pittsburgh. But no, I was watching all those variety shows that you talked about. And the Dick Van Dyke Show. I mean, when I would come home from school, I would put the ottoman in the middle of the den, and as it came on TV, I would walk in the door and I would trip over the ottoman exactly the way Dick Van Dyke did, and I'd get up and I'd adjust my suit, and every day, Monday through Friday, when that was on. No, I was definitely a TV baby of the 70s. There's no doubt about that.
And when you went to your father and you said that this is what I want to do, and he said, I don't want to do that, when did the shift take place? when they said, okay, we're going to let you, obviously the pictures are there and you're very young, that you were allowed to start taking dance class?
Oh, I don't want to give the wrong impression. He was always supportive. He was always supportive. I mean, to be really candid, when I was 16 years old, my dance teacher, Mario Melodia, took me to the Kenley Players, Mr. John Kenley. And that was a big deal for my dad to, well, there he is right there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. Yeah, my brain, I'm sorry, I'm speechless because there's so many stories going on in my mind, because those were the most impressionable years of my life. 16, 17, and 18 years old kid being with the Kenley Players. And I think my dad, to be really honest, I think once when I finally came out as being gay, I think he really believes, maybe to this day, that it was him letting me go to Kenley that made me gay. I mean, I think he's of that generation where he believes that. And I try to explain, no, Dad, it doesn't work. It doesn't work that way.
There was a specific action that your father did that made it happen.
Yeah, I know. But no, Mr. John Kenley, I'm sure you must have known Mr. Kenley.
I didn't know him personally, but of course I knew who he was. And when I first came to New York, I came to New York in 1979. And of course, the Kenley Players, I knew of the Kenley Players. And the Kenley Players was, believe it or not, an aspiration. I auditioned, I got callbacks. I never made it to the Kenley Players. And I think I actually met him at an audition once, but I never actually got cast by the Kenley Players.
Well, he was a remarkable man, responsible for many people's careers. And we have that in common. We both came to New York City in 1979.
Wow.
I actually came there after my first year at Northwestern because Tommy Tune took me out of Northwestern and put me in the first national tour of the Best Little Whorehouse in Texas with Alexis Smith.
Yes.
And we rehearsed at City Center, and that was 1979.
Now, you met Tommy Tune at the, we're jumping ahead of our story a little bit. I want to know how you actually started with the Kenley Players. And I want to talk a little bit about the Kenley Players because you're working on a project that is about the Kenley Players. If you can talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, it's hard to talk about only in the sense that we're still creating it, but he was such an inspiration. I guess I danced, since I was, 9 years old. I took dance lessons. And so I was lucky enough to have Mario, who we talked about earlier, was a choreographer at the Kenley Players. And at the time, Ann Miller was doing Anything Goes, and she needed one more boy dancer. And so my mom drove me up to Warren, Ohio, and we got out of the car, and this apparition, this creature appeared, and it was Mr. Kenley. And he was on that bike that you showed earlier. He would ride down these long halls at E.J. Packard Hall, and he rode into the audition, and there my mom and I were. And it's hard to describe Mr. Kenley because he had like that light skin complexion of like Anita Morris, where you could see the veins, but that beautiful porcelain skin. And he had this wispy kind of red hair, and his vests puckered. And we couldn't figure out why his vest puckered. And he was such a creature, but he was so wonderful to those of us that loved the theater. And as you implied earlier, that's where I met Tommy Tune, who took me under his wing and changed my life. And it was a very fortuitous trip to Warren, Ohio that really it formed the rest of my life. But we are doing, I wanted to, at his 90th birthday party, it was on Riverside Drive, and Joel Gray and Tommy Tune and Elaine Stritch and all of those people that loved Mr. Kenley were there at his birthday party. And for some reason, they had left and I was still there. And I'm sure I had had a few glasses of wine. And I asked him if the rumors about him were true.
You came out and asked him this.
I did, because he was 90. This was so, and we had never, I never had the courage, those of us that we respected him too much to get that personal. But like I said, I probably had some wine, and I feel like it was a fun night, and I thought I had permission. And I asked him if the rumors were true. And not only did he tell me about his life, but I woke up the next day and he had his unpublished autobiography at the front desk of my apartment building. And so I told him that I was going to do a documentary about his life, and he encouraged that. So much to the point that I went to Union Square, the New York Film Academy.
Oh, yeah.
I took a film class there. I hired an Academy Award nominated documentary director to direct it. I produced it. We hired a great cameraman, lighting. John was excited. And the day we were to go to interview him, I got a phone call from his niece saying, Jeff, John told us what you wanted to do and we don't approve. So it's very disappointing. Not only that I've spent a year prepping for this and a lot of money, a great deal of money for me a great deal of money. And I promised Mr. Kenley I would tell his story. And so the documentary, I'll send you it. It's a 28-minute is all I have, because without Mr. Kenley as the subject, all I had were people like Tommy Tune and Elaine Stritch and Joel Gray and Sandy Duncan and all these wonderful people talking about him. But I didn't have Mr. Kenley. So I still wanted to edit it together to feel like I fulfilled my promise to Mr. Kenley.
So what you were going for was a celebration of who he is.
A complete celebration of a hero. I mean, without, giving too much away, this man today, we would call it intersex. At the time, we called it a hermaphrodite.
That's right.
Right? Which means you're born both male and female anatomy.
But I remember, Jeff, when people talked about him at that time in joking matters. It was not, you would hear these things and obviously we are hopefully a little bit more advanced in terms of the way that we deal with this now. But I'm glad that you want to make this, tell this story and everything. But it is important, and I think it's great. But he launched so many careers, and there were so many major stars. For those who don't know what the Kenley Players were and are, let's say what they are, in terms of what it meant for major stars at that time. And it's a shame that the world has changed to the point that we don't have summer stock and that world of show business anymore.
It was such a breeding ground for young talent. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. For those that don't know, he was such a blessing to Ohio because he took major film stars, as you said, from MGM. And as their contracts waned, he brought them to Warren, Dayton, and Columbus, Ohio, and put them in musicals. And that's what was the Kenley Players. And I'm talking Sid Charisse, Gene. Well, there's me. That's my first show. I was 16. That's me and Ann Miller doing Anything Goes. But I'm telling, Sid Charisse and Mickey Rooney and every star you can imagine played the Kenley Players. And then there was the television stars, Henry Winkler and Paul Lynde and Donald O'Connor. I don't think you can name someone from that era that didn't perform on the stages of Mr. Kenley's theaters. So he was really a hero to me, and that he was dealt the cards he was dealt and became a success and a hero and never felt sorry for himself. He never discussed it with us, his personal life, until that birthday party at 90 years old. He was just this exotic creature that we loved and looked up to.
And, and then you, as you mentioned earlier, you met Tommy Tune through the Kenley Players.
Absolutely.
So that was kismet. He says to you, come with me to New York. Did you feel at that point that, wow, this is a great opportunity? Did you feel that you were ready at that moment? What was the final deciding factor? Because that is a major move to make at that point.
Well, Richard, I think it's like we said earlier, there's a naivete of being young where you don't know what you can't do. I didn't know that I should have been really scared out of my wits. So I wasn't smart enough. I understood the privilege and I understood the opportunity, and I didn't want to disappoint. But no, I didn't really at the time. Looking back, of course, it's the most profound thing that's happened in my career. But at the time, I was just loving doing shows. I was in Northwestern, and Tommy said, "You think your parents would let you leave school to tour in the best little whorehouse in Texas?" And so he talked to my parents, and it was quite a negotiation. And ultimately, I promised my parents that at the end of the tour, I would go back to Northwestern, and that's why they acquiesced and let me go. And they're still waiting.
But I mean, there's nothing like life experience. I mean, Carol Channing was a dear friend of mine. And when Carol Channing went to Bennington College, the first year that they're there, they had to come to New York and try to find a job in what it was that they were majoring in. And she came to New York and got a job and never went back. But she said the life experience of being in the theater, and let's face it, you and I both came to New York in 1979. I always joked that I came to New York thinking I was coming to breakfast at Tiffany's, and I ended up on the set of Taxi Driver and Midnight Cowboy.
Quite different.
Yes, New York was a different New York at that time.
Well, it was. Yes.
If you can describe again for those who are watching who don't understand what New York was like at that time, what it was like, and again, that naivete of being in New York at our age at that time, what it was like for you arriving in New York with the world at your feet at that moment.
Well, it was still a city where, just a couple years before that, when my parents would drive us into the city, whether it was to see the theater or go to a Knicks game, or you would lock your doors. They would make us lock the doors. Jeff and Jack, lock your doors.
No, he's talking about locking the doors of his car.
Locking the doors of the car when you would drive through 42nd Street, which is now, right, this beautiful Disney-fied street, thank God. I mean, there was some romance to what it was, but it was dangerous. At least when you came in from the suburbs, we perceived it to be really dangerous. And I don't know, Richard, it's interesting. It was clearly a different time, but I don't know how much of the story I romanticized because of my youth and innocence of the time and how much of it was real. But at that time, oh my God, you were in Oz. Right? I mean, you were in Oz. Coming from the suburbs, and then you're exposed to Manhattan at that age, and like you said, the world is at your feet, and you're too young to know how dangerous it can be, and how every choice that you make is going to have a reaction. Right? You don't think about that when you're young. So for me, I was like Dorothy in Oz. I guess that's the best way to say it. And I got to get up every day and go to City Center and rehearse with Alexis Smith and all these talented performers, this wonderful show that I loved. And then we drove to Boston and we opened at the Colonial Theater in Boston. And at the time, Ed McMahon was in the audience. And I'm like, oh my God, Ed McMahon is watching me dance with Alexis. It was everything. You just were so wide-eyed, and just talking about it brings back I love that innocence. I want to recapture and reclaim some of that, because I do believe as a director, it's important. It's important, right? We're in a sandbox playing, and if people are going to pay money and see you activate your imagination, you have to be that little kid again that dreams up things that other people don't dream about. And it's hard to maintain that, right? With the slings and arrows of what life throws at you as you mature. But I do know it's the kiss of death, at least for the kind of work I like to do. Becoming cynical would be the kiss of death.
Absolutely. I want to talk a moment about Tommy and the relationship that you two have, this symbiotic relationship. And I'd like to ask you, what are the life lessons that you've learned from Tommy that have impacted you as an artist and as a human being?
Wow. I'm not sure anyone's ever asked me that question. Next to my parents, Tommy was the most influential adult in my life. You have to remember, I was 16 when I met him. And we were at the pool of this Holiday Inn, probably where we were staying. and he had silver toenails. Well, in Pittsburgh, I didn't know any guy who had silver toenails. So I'm telling you, the first
Tommy, I hope you're watching.
I mean, you know what he always says, don't tell the story about my silver toenails, but I hope he's kidding when he says that to me. But that's a lot to take in. And don't forget, in 1976, we weren't as forward thinking as we are today. So that was really shocking. So it took me weeks to get over my fear of this eccentric 5'18" creature with silver toenails. But there was also this instant attraction. And looking back, what it was is I realized he was the first artist that I had ever met. A true artist, not someone just doing art as a craft, but he saw the world through eyes like nobody else. And I had never known anyone that saw the world differently than where I came from. We all pretty much saw the world the same way. But then so to answer your question, I was just exposed to an artist and I just observed him as much as I could. And I watched how he saw the world and how he then took that and interpreted it onto the stage and into a conversation, into cocktail conversation, into dinner conversation, into how he decorated his apartment. It was just like, who is this creature? Oh, that's what an artist is. And so I'm not smart enough to put into words all the ways he affected me, but the greatest was he taught me what it's like to be an artist, but he also taught me that I will never be the artist that he is. I can be the best that I can be, but Tommy's, 1 in 10 million. And I think I'm at my best when I aspire to be as good as Tommy is, but I'm not sure that I will ever achieve that because that's the pedestal I kind of put him on. When you look at the work he did, from Grand Hotel and Nine, I mean, he put things on stage that we never saw before. Now we go and see good shows, but rarely do we see something that we have never seen before. The Club, when he did the Club with all the women, no one had ever seen that before. But Nine, we had never seen that before. Tommy was always the star of a Tommy Tune show, which is interesting, right? Because that's a double-edged sword. I once said to Tommy that, Tommy, you have such a style. People leave your shows and you're always the star of the show. And Fosse has his style where people recognize that's Fosse. He goes, I said, Tommy, I don't think I have a style. And he was so kind. He was like, no, Jeff, what's great about you is you serve the piece. So your style changes according to the material. You don't impose your thing onto it. I don't know. I had to believe that's true just so I didn't, kill myself and think I have no style.
Well, speaking of which, I want to ask you about something because there was a time where...
Oh, my God.
Yes. And if you can talk about what that experience is like for you, because I can only imagine, I know that you talked a little bit about this when we did the event last month. You're standing in the wings and you're waiting to go on and they make this announcement and you hear the audience is there to see Tommy Tune, what that experience is like for you as an artist. And there's a very interesting story that I want to put out there before you say anything. And he just wrote about this. Burt Bacharach said that the reason that he didn't do a lot of other Broadway musicals after Promises, Promises was because Richard Rogers went to see a matinee performance of Promises, Promises. And in the orchestra pit, a lot of the musicians were substitute musicians. Do you know this story?
No, but I'm just afraid of what's coming.
And that he made a comment to Burt Bacharach about this. And it was almost as if those musicians were, and I hate this, less than the originals that are normally there playing for the evening performances.
Yeah.
And there was a thread, I hate these theater threads online. I'll put it out there. I don't go to them.
Oh, it's deadly. You can't. It's
They're
cancer.
deadly.
It's
But
cancer.
someone said that they went to see Hamilton, and they sat down and they opened their playbill, and all the inserts fell out of the program, and they were all standbys. And especially now during COVID, that happens a lot. So they made a comment, and I said, no Broadway show is going to put someone on that stage that is not up to the task. You and I both know this. And I have lots of friends. Jana Robbins is a dear friend of mine, and she has stood by for so many people. And we've had many discussions on this. You going on for the Star, and she knows her craft. There's a reason why she has stood by for so many stars. But your thoughts on this for anyone out there who's either on either side of the footlights on that experience?
Oh, Richard, you're so good at this because you make it so casual, and you make me want to just tell you everything that's in my heart, but I'm not good at editing. So I'm just going to, as much as my husband tells me I need to learn to edit, I don't know if this is going to be the answer that you want, but it's twofold. It was the highlight of my performing career, and it was also the death knell, the end of it. I'm a realist, and I realized I would probably not take the final bow in a Tony Award-winning musical, playing a Tony Award-winning role at the St. James Theater ever again, or certainly for a long time. So at the end of those 2 weeks, I stopped performing and started to pursue my dream of being a choreographer director. But to answer your earlier question, on the flip side, I wasn't in the wings when I heard that announcement. It was worse than that. Billy Buck Chandler's entrance in that show is hanging from the clouds as if he just jumped out of his airplane. And they have to load you about 5 minutes before the curtain goes up, because when the curtain goes up, you have to already be 30 feet in the air behind the cloud for the overture. So I'm hanging, dangling from the ceiling. So there was nowhere to run. When they said at this performance, the role usually played by Tommy Tune will be played by Jeff Calhoun. And you heard 1,200 people all just go, oh, and they were completely deflated. And my mom tells me that the people that started to leave, thank God my grandmother was there, because she said, no, that's my grandson, stay there. And so people did stay. And I was awful for the first 10, 15, I mean, awful, Richard. No false smile. I mean, awful. Flop, sweat. And the whole time I'm performing, I'm going, what am I doing here? It was the worst nightmare of my life. But then I started to get comfortable and realized, you know what? I was born to do this. And by the end of the act, it was okay. And then in Act 2, getting to dance with Honey Coles, that famous number. And so I found my legs, my sea legs. And much to maybe it was my grandparents and parents that started it. But, I was lucky that I got a standing ovation every performance for 2 weeks. But it was also there such a fear factor. It played on every insecurity I had. I wasn't a good enough actor. I couldn't sing well enough. Every fear, and that's not healthy for an actor. And so I got to stop performing sort of at the height of, you dream of starring in a Broadway show, even as the understudy, which I was, a standby, I guess they called it. I'm not quite sure the difference, but so it was a blessing.
Joanne Burley said it was the size of the paycheck.
Well, I don't even remember. I just remember it was more money than I had ever made before. And it allowed me to have my own apartment on 38th Street between 8th and 9th Street. And I could just walk to the St. James Theater every night. It was a very romantic time. And Twiggy, I got to marry Twiggy 16 times, But like I said, for a tap dancer from Pittsburgh to dance with Charles Honey Coles and to be able to do it.
Really, Jeff? Twiggy got to marry you.
Twiggy gave me my first sushi. I was still so naive I didn't know if we had sushi in Pittsburgh, but I certainly never had sushi. And she gave me sushi at Kodama's. Remember Kodama's across the street from and I did not like it. And because I was with Twiggy, I pretended that, I liked it. Which reminds me, we talked about Alexis Smith. She gave me my first escargot. Also, I only kept it down because I was sitting next to Alexis Smith. Those are two things that this palate from Pittsburgh never really acquired that taste, Richard.
Do you know the song, It's a Great Thing He Can't Read My Mind?
Say that again?
You know the song, It's a Great Thing He Can't Read My Mind by Christine Lavin?
No.
I'm going to send it to you because it's about that very thing.
Is it really?
Yes.
The peer pressure that we put on ourselves when we're with people that we are admire.
I'm going to send that to you. But I mean, you talk about sometimes it takes these life experiences to put us on the right path in our lives.
Yes.
I mean, you've become a phenomenal director, choreographer. Do you miss when you made the decision, this is not the career path that I want to be on? And that light bulb went off, that click happened. Did you miss not wanting to go back to that at all?
God, no, Richard, not for 1 second. I love, when I'm as a director, when you're sitting in the back of the theater, I feel for those actors. I marvel. I sit there and go, I don't know how they do it. I'm a nervous wreck, and I'm in the back of the house for every show I do. I don't know how they do it anymore. I really can't remember who that person was that wanted to go out in the limelight and entertain people. The thought of that is so frightening. I have such admiration and respect for actors because I really do. I sit there on all my new shows and I'm just in awe how brave they are. I just love actors and performers.
Well, Jeff, I mean, but I see your name attached to so many projects. And you've reached the level, obviously, in this business where and you have the gravitas. How do you choose now, with so many things coming at you, what you're going to devote your time and energy to?
Well, you're very kind. First of all, there aren't enough. I wish there were more. This pandemic was just devastating. It's devastating to go 2 years without a paycheck. I mean, I think most Americans can relate to that. I don't want to say profound again. I just don't have the vocabulary. Maybe I should have stayed in Northwestern. But it was devastating. But to answer your question, listen, I've been privileged. Imagine from 16 years old getting to observe the likes of a Tommy Tune, and then for the next 20 years, watching how he does what he does. It was such a gift. And my parents really taught me to respect my elders, and I've learned from my elders. And so I just hope that at my best, I steal from the best, but pay back with interest. That's really what it's about. And to be less flippant, I try to find shows that I think entertain me, because Richard, I don't know what people want anymore on Broadway. There was a time where I thought I know what a Broadway show looks like, feels like, and smells like. And now,
but don't you think, and I say this respectfully, don't you think that because of the climate that we're living in now, that people are walking around on eggshells? Because people are afraid that they're going to offend somebody, or they're going to do the wrong thing, or they're not going to make the right decision, and that it's getting further and further. I see getting further away from just being about the art and being more about trying to make a statement.
Well, that's a very kind of loaded observation. I mean, the point I was trying to make was, I thought my whole career would be big tap dance musicals, because and I've yet to direct and choreograph a big tap dance musical. But in regards to what you're saying, I love that there are new stories being told. And right now, the shows I'm developing one musical
excuse me,
about the life of Jesus. I'm doing one musical about an intersex gentleman that we talked about earlier. I'm doing a musical for the deaf, which would be starring the first deaf character in a musical, not an actor, but a character. So I think it's important to tell stories that haven't been told before, or at least I think I have a take on how to tell them in a new light. So that's what fascinates me. I love subject matter that I think, oh my God, this will really intrigue people, but yet also entertain people. I'm not interested in just doing a black box musical that no one's going to see. Maybe I'm not enough of an artist for that. I want that mixture of commerce and art. I want it to reach the multitudes, but I also want it to be about something. And so I think I have Elaine's. I'm doing a musical next week about one of the first feminists, but about not your typical ingenue. I'm doing a musical about this woman who was the restaurateur. She had a restaurant called Elaine's. I'm sure you know of it.
Elaine Kaufman. I went to Elaine's. I asked, we talked briefly, and I said, I wanted to save this for the show. Mary Testa, I love, and I think that's brilliant casting because you need, and I say this with all due respect, because Mary, I love you. You need someone with that intimidating presence to play her. Because I was intimidated by Elaine Kaufman when I met her.
Oh, she scared the crap out of me.
Yes, me too.
I mean, but she was so successful and she was loved, not unlike Mr. Kenley. You know what I mean? There was this intimidation and love. It was the flip side. But Mary, for me, I'm a fan of Mary's, and she's always has great roles, but she hasn't had a vehicle. And I think this could really be a vehicle for her because she's so talented. And Elaine has such pathos. I mean, she was a strong woman, but love was hard for her. It was hard for her to find love. But what we've explored and what we've come up with was, not unlike Sam, the bartender in Cheers, what they both have in common is I think they realized that their love affair was actually their life. It wasn't a person, it was the restaurant and all the clientele that came there. And I think we all have to realize in our life, what is it that provides that love? Because it comes in different forms for different people. And that's sort of what we're exploring with Elaine's. It's exciting. It's very exciting.
Well, I wish you much success with that, because it sounded, when I read about it, it sounded like such an exciting project to work on. I want to ask you, with everything that's happened in your career, if there is a particular moment, you don't have to name names or anything because I'm all about celebrating, that was a very difficult period to get through in your career, and what was the fortitude, or what got you through that period? And I ask this question for those who do see this either tonight or at a later time, because this is a difficult business. What gets you through those dark times?
Well, you go there, don't you, Richard? I know, because we always tend to talk about the hits, but they're not the hits. You know, you have a good time with hits. I'm not sure you learn anything, but you sure do have a hell of a good time. I learned the most from, the darkest chapter in my life professionally was a show called Busker Alley. Tommy Tune. And we had great adversity with that show on the road. Even before he broke his fifth metatarsal, a week before we were to come to Broadway, where we had Leroy Neiman had painted the theater.
I see it.
James Theater.
Yes.
It was devastating. And without getting too deep, because we want to celebrate, and, Tommy was my mentor, and to this day, we're very close. But there were several years where we did not communicate. It was hard. It was like, for me, I say it was like the end of My Fair Lady if he did not ask for his slippers. Right? So she leaves and he doesn't ask for the slippers, and that's it. What do you do when your mentor, and when you part, when you're pushed out of the nest? And so you're on your own, and you're scared that your only ticket was that association. And it's the best thing that ever happened to me, although I didn't realize it at the time because it was so painful. It was very painful. But it forced me to create my own identity. And because I was forced out of the nest, I had to create my own identity. And I started working without that association and without that connection. And that allowed me to build my own career. And then it wasn't until that happened that Tommy and I came back into each other's life, and now he's still, one of my best friends and still my mentor. But that was a dark time. And let me think about it. Your question was, what got you through the dark time? Well, for me, it was my closeness to my family. But you know what? There's no magic elixir. Sometimes I would say time, not to quote Jerry Herman, but time does heal everything in some way. It's not to say the pain will disappear, but the heart's the only organ that can break and it keeps on working.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I guess I would say to people, without being too presumptuous, you have to just sort of trust that time will take care of it and explore what that sadness is like, because to the degree you're sad is going to be the degree that you're going to be celebratory and happy when it passes, right? Because everything is its opposite, right? You can only laugh to the degree you could potentially cry. Mm-hmm. You can only be as compassionate mathematically to the degree that you've been hurt. I believe that. So I think, I'd never thought about that, but I think that's the best answer I have for you at this moment.
It's a great answer. And I want to ask you, what do you think is the biggest impact that the past year and a half plus has had on you as an artist? And what do you think that you've learned about yourself over the past year and a half that you think that you will carry forward in your career in terms of the way that you do your work moving forward?
I'm torn. Part of me wanted to say I loved the downtime, while at the same time I wanted to say I never want to lose work again. So I'm not sure. Life is many things, right? It's duplicitous, because I think both of those things are true. Part of me enjoyed having that downtime and that lack of stress of having to deliver something, or the fear of what people are going to write about you in public. All those things we think about as artists. But at the other end of the spectrum, I missed it like crazy. And Richard, I thought, I realized I was a hypocrite, because I would tell people all the time, you can't get your self-worth from your work. It needs to come from somewhere else. Well, you know what? I was full of it, because I realized that for me, a lot of my self-worth and happiness is derived from work. And so how am I going to maintain that? I think every job I have now will be richer and more meaningful to me, and I will be more appreciative because I realized what that 2 years was like without it. Mm-hmm. And so I hope I respect it. I thought I did before, but I'm going to respect it even more now going forward.
So I want to ask you something about your personal life now, your husband and you. How long have you been together?
We're in our 24th year.
Is he in the business as well?
Oh, God, no.
I say the same thing about my husband.
Did that. Yeah. No, I worked. No, I did that. And I did waiters. And now I'm not. No, he's a massage therapist.
Oh, good for you. That's good.
He runs a beautiful healing center in Chelsea. And he grounds me. He's a Taoist, and a true Taoist. And he's a very grounding force in my life. It's the luckiest thing that ever happened to me, was meeting him.
That's great. And do you have big plans for the holidays?
You know what? Yes, our big plans are we spend it with my parents.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Michael has lost his parents. And so my parents love him and he loves them. And we have a nice, intimate holidays these days.
Okay.
which is really nice.
That's wonderful. Well, as we wind up our show, I always end the show with my homage to James Lipton and Inside the Actors Studio.
Oh no, I know what's coming.
He always ended his show with his questions, but I've got my own questions.
Oh God.
These are not his, so I'm not going to ask you if you meet God what you would say to him. So don't worry about that. But
wait. If you're ending this, before we end it, I just have to say, I have to ask you a question.
Okay.
I've watched so many of your interviews with Carol Channing.
Yes.
And I know, you've won MAC awards and you've personified Carol, let's say. How did that happen? How did that materialize from you being a 5-year-old into Carol Channing? All this Carol Channing resonance.
Oh, we'll have to do another whole show about that. That's a long story, and I don't want to take up your show.
Well, I had long stories that I had to condense.
But essentially, I loved seeing Carol Channing on TV. I would perform at parties, and people would say, "You do such a great impression of Carol. You should do a show about Carol."
Wow.
And my feeling was, what if she doesn't like what I do? And I don't want to do anything. I've got, I was wondering if I had a photograph nearby that I could grab and show you, but nothing that I can grab off the wall here without wrecking something. But anyway, she, before I opened my show, I got the opportunity to perform for her as her. Wow. And when that happened, she sat on a stool in front of me and she cried. And she said that most people who impersonated her made fun of her and treated her cruelly, as she said to me.
Wow.
And she became a good friend. I stayed at her home in Palm Springs. And for 20 years, I had this phenomenal ride, and it was just incredible. And as I got to know her as a real person, instead of this iconic being that was out there, the more I got to know her, the less I wanted to perform as her, because I didn't feel that I could live up to the real person.
Wow, that's beautiful. Do you know that she is on Tommy Toon's answering machine? When you call Tommy, you hear Carol.
I know.
It's a small world. But sorry, I just was curious because
she used to call me every Christmas morning, and she would say, "Hello, Richard, it's Carol. Carol Channing? Yes, this is your Christmas Carol." Every Christmas morning, and and I miss her tremendously. But it's a long story, and maybe someday
we'll talk
about that. But that's it. But my first question that I want to ask you is, what is the best example? And maybe you've answered it in the show tonight. But what is the best example of loyalty that you have experienced in your career? And I think maybe you've answered it.
I think the best example of loyalty is when the chips are down and you're not at your best, but somebody is still there for you. And I've had that experience of people being there and not being there. And I think that really defines loyalty. The ones that are still there when you're not on top.
I've got 2 comments from 2 people. Bart Shadow, who is going to be on the show on Saturday afternoon, by the way. And I can't wait. He says, "We love you, Jeff. Such a passionate artist and a heartfelt interview." So I thank you for that. Jackie Joseph Lawrence, who is one of my favorite people, says, "Please tell Jeff how much I love him and treasure our time together and miss him."
Oh, that's so sweet. See, I get so emotional. I'm such a sissy.
Me too.
I cry but the casts always make fun of me. The newsies, they would just, because when important, milestones happen, what I learned from Tommy is these are the good old days.
Yes.
Don't wait for them. These are them.
We have a plant that Jackie gave us from her garden, which is in my husband's office here. We call it Audrey 2 because she's the original Audrey, and from Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah, of course.
And this plant is growing across his office. So, Jackie, your plant's thriving here. And I've got now my avocado tree from Carol. I want to ask you, do you journal or have you ever journaled?
Oh, I think it's really important to do that.
And have you ever thought about writing your memoirs?
No, I'm still working on reading before I can start writing. But you know what? I'm terrible because I've had such a blessed life, but I don't remember it until I do these kind of interviews where I go, oh, wow, Richie Ridge, I had lunch with today.
Oh,
And
I love him.
he's an encyclopedia of theater knowledge. And in talking to him, all these stories came up that I completely forgot. Moments in my life that I completely forgot I had. So no, I'm not a writer, Richard. I wish I was, and I love writers. My career is contingent on writers. I wish I was, but part of success is knowing what you don't do as much as knowing what you do. And unfortunately, I'm just not a good writer.
Okay. And things in your life that you need to throw out.
Oh, anything you haven't worn in 6 months, throw out.
Me too.
I mean, I'm good at that. I'm not a hoarder. I try not to get too attached to things because of the theater. It's so ephemeral. It's here. And then I don't care. The best show in the world eventually is going to close. It's not like movies that are around forever. So you have to have that mentality where you're okay with something closing and letting go. And I think I can apply that to material things in my life too. Let it go. As far as I think you meant more emotionally than materially. And no, I think all the things that we do feel are valuable.
Well, Jackie Joseph says you make great hummus.
I love to make hummus. And it's so easy. You just have to have one of those things that look like a
Pistol? Is it called a pistol?
No, it's electric. And it looks like a certain other, yeah. Okay. And it's really good with it makes it great. And all you need is olive oil and chickpeas, and you put in garlic and rosemary, and it's delicious.
Well,
I love to cook. It's like putting on a show. I love it.
We talked earlier about John Kenley and the Kenley Players. I named someone that you've worked with in your past that you feel that by today's standards, people have forgotten, that people really need to know who that person is again. And it could be John Kenley or someone that you've shared the stage with that you really would love to get a resurgence for people to know who they are.
Well, Richard, as you get older, the list gets longer because Tommy Tune would be at the top of that list. I work with young people today that don't know that name.
Someone told me today that a designer friend of mine, David Joseph, he's watching. He's a designer, and he was talking about the Kennedy Center honors, and he's designing a wedding gown for this young woman. And he said he was so excited because he designed a dress for Melissa Manchester, who's going to be on the Kennedy Center honors, honoring Bette Midler. And this young woman said, "Who's Bette Midler?"
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Richard, I think when we were young, we were acutely aware of the shoulders that we were standing on to be privileged enough to do what we do. And I'm not sure there's still that same reverence or respect that there used to be. And I don't know whether it's a byproduct of social media, because everyone's now their own star of their own movie every second of their life, from what they're eating to what they're doing, now I don't know. But it does make me sad. I would put Tommy Tune on that list. I would put Charles Honey Coles on that list. You know what? Almost everyone that I've worked with that I love and admire that's of a certain age, I think this generation has forgotten. So the list is too long for me to answer. But I would like to answer it in a different way. I would like to see musicals, modern musicals, but that looked like the golden era of musicals.
That would be great.
The stories could be contemporary, but I just don't know that the economics allow for that nowadays, unfortunately. But, I just saw Moulin Rouge, and that's the closest thing. I just loved every second of it.
Me too.
And
Absolutely.
it reminded me of the Will Rogers Follies. It reminded me of shows that used to look like that. I just think Alex Timbers is brilliant, and the choreography was brilliant. I'm sorry, I can't remember her name. And I just loved it. It was really like a nice, beautiful, old-fashioned Broadway musical.
And and speaking of Will Rogers Follies, thank you. I mean, I just love, that show still resonates so strongly. And do you think we'll ever see that again? I mean,
Richard, I just think it's so expensive.
I know.
If you don't have Hugh Jackman as Will Rogers, I just don't know how you do it. Although I said that, but here's Moulin Rouge proving me, thank God, yes, Moulin Rouge is a bona fide hit, because I just loved every second, and it just made me happy. It's everything that a lot of people want in a Broadway show. And don't get me wrong, I also like the smaller boutique shows.
Mm-hmm.
There was just something so infectious about Moulin Rouge that reminded me of the golden era of Broadway, and everyone on that stage was remarkable.
It's just fun. I mean, it was
so much fun. From the minute you walk in, it's just fun. And the skill,
immersive atmosphere.
Oh, the craft that goes into that is this. I mean, Alex is he's really something. I'm a big fan of his.
And this next question, maybe you've already answered this tonight, but what experience in your career has made you the wisest?
I think it was I'm not sure it's the superlative that you're asking, but it's certainly up there. It would be my debut as a Broadway director. It was the revival of Grease. And I was young.
Mm-hmm.
And I was younger than many people in the show. And I made the mistake of wanting everyone to like me and to be everyone's friend. And what I realized is that's not really the job of a director. So I think, oh, look at there. There's Marissa. Okay, so Sutton on the right. Sutton won the Tony Award for, as we all know, for Thoroughly Modern Millie. Mm-hmm. And then the next year, all the way on the left, Marissa won for Hairspray. And then, of course, in the middle, isn't that wonderful? That's Megan. And we went to Northwestern together. And that was her Broadway debut in Grease. She was the original Marty for the revival. And then she went on to become a superstar. Yeah, I'm lucky to find people at the right time to put them in shows. I'm so fortunate to have been in the right place at the right time for a lot of young talent that walked into the room.
That's wonderful.
So I would say it was that education of knowing that a director, as much as I want to be everyone's friend and I want them to like me, my job is to make the show as clean and as good as it needs to be mm-hmm. for the producer and for the audience. And it made me wiser going through that. I learned the hard way. I learned, it's like, I assume it's like being a parent.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know how to be a parent until you're a parent.
That's right.
And then you get better with each kid. I think you understand the job more and more. And I think that's the same as a director. The more shows you do and you're responsible for, the better you are at it. And I was a novice at the time. Mm-hmm. And so I gained a great deal of wisdom from that experience.
And again, this next question, perhaps you've answered this question tonight. When did you need the most perseverance in your career?
It would have been those years that followed Busker Alley that we did talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, you know what? That took perseverance. That wasn't more, no, you know what? I changed my mind. That was really just more learning how to deal with the dark time. Mm-hmm. The perseverance was going back to Grease. Grease was a big hit, and it ran 4 years, and it made everyone a lot of money. And I was lazy. I thought my phone was going to be ringing off the hook and people were going to want me to do everything. And so I played golf and I partied and I had fun. And so it's the opposite of the question you're asking. That's when I learned that I should have had more perseverance while I had a hit running, rather than sitting back waiting for the phone to ring. And if I had to do it over again, I would have known to persevere during that time, not to get complacent.
Wow, that's great. What is the best example of someone helping you out in this business?
Well, this is going to sound, I'm just so Pollyanna. My parents,
Okay.
you know, there was nothing I couldn't turn to my parents for, and Tommy, you know. But I've also been surrounded with wonderful people that have helped me out in certain chapters of my life. I really am just surrounded and blessed by wonderful people. But I'd have to say my parents and Tommy, they were always there when I needed somebody.
That's wonderful.
Mm.
What is the one thing that a friend has that you would love to have for yourself?
A Tony Award.
Okay, you're going to get it. When have you listened to your heart and on a hunch that was right on for you?
To go to Deaf West Theater for $500 to direct Oliver at Deaf West Theater in North Hollywood. You have to remember, at the time, no one had ever thought that you could do a musical where half the cast was deaf and half was hearing. And when I got that phone call from a friend of mine, Bill, who said, "Hey, you want to come do a show? There's only 2 requirements. One is it has to be a musical, and the second is half the cast has to be deaf." And I thought, are you stoned? Are you like, what? But now there was just something, you know, my friends were like, "Jeff, all you've said is you want an opportunity like a black box with shafts of light and imagination." And that's what they were offering me. And I'm embarrassed that I was arrogant enough that it took me a day to think about it. But looking back, my hunch to do that job changed my life and my career. And it's probably the greatest chapter of my life was working with Deaf West.
Now, as we close out, I'm going to go back to your Broadway debut. I love this photograph. So this here,
Oh,
wasn't this,
God.
wasn't this your Broadway debut?
I guess it was. It was so long ago, I forgot. Look, back when I wasn't ashamed to show my chest.
No, I love this photograph. It has nothing to do with the show, but
It has nothing to do with the show.
whose idea was this photograph? And
Uh,
Debbie, I love Debbie. I just had her on. I just did an interview a few weeks ago, and she did a little promo for me. So tell me the story about this photograph.
I just don't
Do you
understand why I was obsessed with showing my stomach. But I can tell you, this is the show. We opened on a Thursday. We closed on a Sunday, which is why this poster is in Joe Allen's. And the headline from the Frank Rich Review was 7 brides for 7 clowns. So you know what? You have to have the downside too. You know, you have to have those flops to really understand the business, right? To have that perspective. You can't just have a perspective from the top of the hill. You have to also see at the bottom looking up and realize, oh, wow, sometimes I accomplished that. Because you don't always, but I love Debbie Boone, and all the guys there in that picture are friends of mine, and they're just wonderful. Larry Teeter and Craig and Mike Reagan. They're just great. They're just great people. It was a special time. That was a special time.
Well, Jeff, I'm so thrilled that you said I'd love to do your show, and I'm thrilled that you said yes and that you're here tonight. Don't go anywhere for a moment. I have a few things that I'd like to say to everyone. First of all, thank you all for being here tonight. I know that I can speak for Jeff when I say this. We don't take it lightly when you take the time to spend time with any of us in this business. So the fact that you chose to spend an hour with us tonight, I say thank you. So thank you for being here. If this is your first time here at Richard Skipper Celebrates, I hope it won't be your last. There's a little button that says join in the celebration. Click on that button and check out the other people that have been on the show. Celebrate them as well. Leave a comment here on YouTube. Let us know what you think of the show. Share this with your friends and share it around. I always end my shows by telling everyone to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. I also end every show by telling everyone to go out and make a phone call. I don't want to end on a sad note, but a lot of you know that I lost one of my dear friends this week, Peggy Eason. A lot of you know this. She died suddenly on Saturday afternoon. She was in the hospital. She went home, and 20 minutes after getting home from the hospital, she died. And we spoke the day before. My last words to her, she said, "I love you." And I said, "I love you more." So I am so thrilled that that was the last thing that I was able to say to her. I tell people, pick up the phone and call your friends. Don't just email people. Don't just send them a text message. Don't just inbox them. Pick up the phone and call your friends, because you never know when it will be that last phone call. She sounded phenomenal the day before. And again, just reach out. It's important. As my dear friend David Friedman always says, we're all in this together, but we're not in the same boat. And I always say, if you're going to go out in a boat, make sure you bring a skipper along. I'm actually going to leave the screen, Jeff, and you're going to have the final word all to yourself. Anything that you want to say about anything that we talked about tonight that you want to build upon, anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had, or just any message that you want to put out to anyone who's watching right now. Don't worry about how to end the show, because as soon as you say goodbye, I will end the show. I thank you for the gifts that you've given to the world and that you're going to continue to give to the world. You're going to get that, Tony. I see it as clearly as I see my own name, and it's there. So thank you, and I hope you'll do this again. Will you come back sometime?
It'd be my pleasure. It's a privilege. And let me just say, I don't think that people understand that Richard doesn't prep his guests on anything. So the questions I didn't know about, what he just threw in me right now, I had no idea he was going to say, but it's an easy way to close. What I'd like to say is,
it's all yours. So you got the vital word.
Thank you, Richard. What I'd like to say is, thank you, Richard, because the world's a mess right now. And thank God for things like the arts that can bring people that otherwise outside of a theater would disagree vehemently about things, but inside a theater have a shared experience that's hopefully positive. And thank Richard for celebrating, for not gossiping, not degrading, but for bringing positivity and joy into the world. Richard, thank you. I know that I needed that right now, and I'm sure a lot of people do. And so thank you for your celebration, because there's a lot to celebrate out there, and it's easy to forget that. So I encourage anyone to try to find something to celebrate. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.